All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Science Cafe event tonight. My name is Tracy Santani, and I am one of the co-founders of the Fort Worth Science Cafe. Before we dive in, I would like to first thank you for joining us and introduce you to the rest of the team that has made a Fort Worth Science Cafe series possible. Eric Gonzalez, Marlo Jeffries, and Mags Ritby, who unfortunately couldn't be with us this evening. The four of us have been working together to deliver a Science Cafe series to the DFW area and are grateful that you've chosen to spend your Wednesday evening with us. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Science Cafes, they began as a grassroots movement in the 1990s in England and in France, and they seek to bring science to the public in a fun and informal way. Typically, science cafes take place in cafes or bars over a cup of coffee or a pint of beer, so feel free to grab your beverage of choice if you haven't already done so. In light of the pandemic, our event tonight is happening virtually. We hope to have our first in-person event in October, so please keep up with us on social media. We have a Facebook page, a Twitter account, an Instagram, and a meetup group to ensure that you don't miss our next event. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Tory Bennett. Dr. Bennett is an associate professor in the Department of Environmental Sciences at TCU. Specializing in wildlife ecology and conservation, she has over 25 years of experience working with bats. She has worked with and advised government, state equivalent, and private sector agencies to manage and support bat populations in the UK, Africa, Vietnam, Central America, and the US. Here in Texas, she focuses on the conservation of local bat species involving schools, organizations, and DFW neighborhoods in her research to raise awareness, explore the impact of human activities on bats, and improve their habitats, such as urban areas for bats. Tonight, Dr. Bennett will give us a 20-minute presentation followed by a question and answer session moderated by Marlo and Eric, where we encourage you to ask any questions that you may have about our furry flying friends. If you think of questions during Tory's presentation or during the Q&A session, please place them in the Q&A feature of Zoom. These questions will be moderated by our panelists, and we will include as many of your questions in our conversation as time allows. So now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Tory, who will share with us everything we ever wanted to know about bats and more.
Hello, everybody. So let's see if I can get this shown. Like they said, please ask questions. I'm used to being very interactive, so this is a little different for me, not being able to see any of your faces. All right, can everybody see that? I just need a thumbs up from Marlo. Good. Okay. Good. All right. Fantastic. All right. So everything that you need to know, right? So just starting with the very basics that bats are in the order Chiroptera. And very loosely, bats are broken into megabats and microbats. There's been a lot of reshuffling because of genetics, but we can still loosely put them into this, and you'll know the difference between the bats when I talk about them. The first group is the megabats. These are our biggest bats. These are the flying foxes, and most of them are only in the old world, so we're not going to have them here in the US. These are the ones that you see eating bananas and all wrapped up in towelin and things like that. They're very, very big. So, and I will just highlight these so you can see all of these three pictures are in fact megabats. Then we have microbats. These are the smaller. So there is some overlap between the sizes when it comes to the middle, but one of our smallest microbats is the bumblebee bat, which fits on the end of your thumb. And this is this tiny little bat that you can see on a thumb. So there's a huge variety of bats, and I focus on microbats, and these are actually found all over the world. There is one myth about bats that you should know about, and I'll play that, but we should, oh, I've got show sound on.
Those aren't big birds, sweetheart. They're giant vampire bats.
So the issue with that is that those giant vampire bats are your flying foxes. So unless you've decided to put a whole load of fruit on your face, you're not going to be attacked by them. That's a complete lie. Thank you, Hollywood. So I try to dispel those kind of myths. If you can spot any more myths that you want to ask me about, please do. That was number one. But microbats are the ones that I study, and they are found everywhere in the world but Antarctica. Again, there's a program on the television recently called Zoo, where a whole load of bats flew down and covered some solar panels in the Antarctic to kill some people in a research station. That's not possible and completely ridiculous. And it hurts my soul when they do these things on television. But most species you'll find in the tropics. So if you look at like Kenya, there's 145 different species. Peru has 152. When we're going up a little higher in the tropics, you're looking at India has 128, Mexico 137. And then when you go into this step over into the temperate, we've got Texas in the US with 47. Texas has 29 species. That's because Texas is big. And then Fort Worth and basically Dallas, DFW Metroplex has 7. Now these 7 species, and I've got 6 of them here, the common species, are a whole range of different species. Some of them look really good. You've got the hoary bat that hangs out in trees. It looks like a broken branch from a conifer. So it literally is just sitting there in a tree. So cryptic, it cannot be seen. You've got its cousin, which is the eastern red. This one hangs out in bunches of red leaves. So again, it's out there. You can't buy bat boxes for these guys because they're just hanging in trees. Your silver hair looks like a silverback gorilla, has fluffy black silver tipped fur. This one hangs out in woodpecker holes. And then you have your tricolored bat. These guys like the hollows in trees, broken branches, peeling bark, similar to evening bat. These both have very, very small colonies. The evening bat is our most common species here in Texas. It's the one that actually eats mosquitoes, so I'm going to highlight that. And this one will go into bat boxes. Then you've got your Mexican freetail, which also likes bat boxes, but it likes the big bat boxes because it's that really big colonial species that you find under bridges. So if any of you feel like you want to go down to the Congress Avenue Bridge and watch those bats come out, they're all Mexican freetail. Just going back, the reason why it's called a Mexican freetail is it does have a little bit of its tail that's hanging out. Its tail membrane does not come to the very end of its tail like all the other bats, so it has a free tail. And then we have a 7th bat now, which was discovered in 2016. We picked it up acoustically, doing surveys. This is new to North Central Texas. It's the canyon bat. And if you look at the range on this presentation, it's not really supposed to be here. It's shifted its range. And I will leave you that up to you to think about why it shifted its range. I'm not getting involved. But what makes bats really cool is that they fly. They're the only true mammal to show true flight, not to be confused with sugar gliders and flying squirrels, which just have a good knack of falling. And the reason why that they can actually fly is that they have adapted their hands basically to have this adaptation of wings. So it's their metacarpals and their fingers have extended and a membrane has like stretched across them so that they can fly, very, very similar to birds and pterodactyls apparently. And this is how it works. They actually use their tail membrane to steer. So this is important. And Mexican freetails with their little free tail is kind of like a rudder. And the other thing about bats is they're nocturnal. Now they are the dark side of the world, as it were, because birds fill exactly the same niches during the day. So you are going to find a bird and a bat that do exactly the same thing. Just one does it at night, the other does it during the day. Bats are amazing because each species tries not to compete against each other, same as the birds. And so they fill very, very different, well, it's not very, very different, but quite different niches in a same environment. So in the UK, where I come from, you can have 17 species flying in the same area. None of them are getting in the way of each other because they all just fly in slightly different places. Here, obviously 7, and they all do fly in different places slightly. And the reason they can be nocturnal is they echolocate. Now, myth number 2 is bats aren't blind. They can see just as well as you can, and you can't see in the dark very well, and neither can they. So they have echolocation. This is where they send out a chirp. The echoes that come back from hitting an object tells them exactly what they see. So it can be a bug, it can be a surface, and you can have all sorts of different kinds of echolocation tweaked. So different frequencies, different loud to quiet, the decibels can be very, very different. So these bats don't, again, compete with each other, and they can be in slightly different environments based on their echolocation. And so what this is, echolocation, is ultrasound. So you can't hear them. There are a few bat species, one actually in Texas called the pallid bat, that has a frequency that you could actually hear. Whether people actually notice, because it's on the high end, is another thing. The best hearing the people who can hear echolocation are going to be 15-year-old girls, because they have the best, highest frequency at the point. So it's 20 kilohertz is the limit to us. And as you get older, and this includes me now, I can't hear probably up to 15 kilohertz. So unfortunately, so if you do see your dog or cat looking up at the sky at night, it's usually because there's a bat flying around, because they can also hear in ultrasound. And this is what a bat call looks like. So it's a series of chirps, as I said, that go out and then come back. And you can see how they're spaced. So they just send them out to see what's going on. And when they come back, they send out another one. So you can actually see activities. So as they are coming up to an insect, their echoes come back faster. So the chirps go out faster, and it gets faster and faster and faster and faster and faster until right at the end. Now I'm going to play that in a minute. But what happens is that we can take down these ultrasonic sounds and put them at a level that we can hear. So technology does this for us. So this first one is what we would hear if we just take the frequency that's high down to a level that we can audibly hear. Oh my goodness. Hold on. Let's see if I can do that again. So it sounds like a series of wet slaps. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slow that call down. It's called time expansion, and you're going to see here a difference in it. Now it sounds like a series of chirps, and if you follow along with the calls, it gets faster and faster and faster. There you go. It catches a bug right there at the end. So you can actually tell what bats are doing. And the nice thing about this is, as I just alluded, that lots of bats have slightly different echolocation calls, so you can see what species are actually out there. So every single one of these are different. We can put bat detectors out, we can leave them, we can go walk with them, and we can actually tell what species we've got. So it's actually a really cool way of monitoring our bats. And bats have all sorts of different diets. This is important. If you go to Arizona, you're going to get some of 2 of the species that actually feed on nectar. You can actually put bird feeders out and feed them, and they'll come in and use those bird feeders, just like hummingbirds. That's how they work. Then you've got a lot of these species, particularly in the US, the majority are insectivorous. They're going to be taking your bugs. And then across the world, you're going to see some other species, particularly in the tropics. You're going to get these crazy species that act like birds of prey, taking mice, frogs, that sort of thing. You also have a series of bats that actually can fish. They troll the water and pluck a fish out. So they're fishermen's bats and things like that. And then you have a whole bunch of different species that feed off fruit, not just the megabats that are flying foxes that our diet are purely fruit, but there's a whole bunch of microbats that eat fruit as well. And this makes bats very important because, one, here in the US, for sure, they are pest control, providing ecosystem services such as that. If you were to remove every single bat in the US, and they've actually done calculations on this, the agricultural industry would be down by $3.7 million because they're dealing with more pesticides that they're putting out and agricultural damage. What this means is it's going to cost you more for your food if we lost our bats. So we want to keep bats for that reason. The other thing the service that bats provide, as I also said, is because we have nectivorous nectar-eating bats. They are pollinators and seed dispersers are the fruit bats. Now in Arizona, I think it is, you've got your saguaro cactus, which is pollinated by bats specifically. The flowers are set up for them. This might be important to some of you, but agave is pollinated by bats. So if we want to keep getting some alcoholic beverages like tequila, that would be a good idea to keep our bats. But there are lots of threats to bats. The oldest threat to bats is the loss of habitat and its degradation. We have been modifying habitat for years now, and it's caused all our bat populations globally to reduce. And it's because we're removing their resources, where they roost, what they feed on, where they drink. It's become quite the problem everywhere. And just to show you that this is continuing and it's not necessarily reversible. So since the 1950s, we've seen lots of natural habitat being removed, agriculture taking over, urbanization. And this has actually led to some of our species that we have in the US becoming endangered. And this particular bat, the Indiana bat, it is found in Indiana and surrounding states, so the name is kind of nice, is listed as endangered, and it was put on that list on March 11th, 1967. It is never coming off that list because we cannot replace the habitat it's lost. We can never get those population numbers back to what it was. So it's always going to be there, as an example. And then some of you might have heard about this. There is a fungal pathogen called white nose syndrome that has come out on our bats, and it appeared in 2006. Just going back or forward, there is a cave system in New York where they believe that somebody, a tourist, came to visit from, they've done the genetics on white nose syndrome, the fungus itself. It comes from Asia, but they don't know where in Asia it came from. So some Asian spelunker came over and had some spores on their person, and it got deposited in this cave system. And they came back a year later, the people who monitor these bats. And whilst these bats were hibernating and all the bats were on the floor, we're talking millions of bats had died in this cave. And that's when we first learned about this fungal pathogen. It attacks bats when they are hibernating. So it's in their system, and when their immune system goes down, gets lowered because of hibernation, their heart rate goes down, they're trying not to burn as many calories so they can get through the winter. That's when this fungus takes hold. And you can see its fruiting bodies on all of its kind of skin. So the membrane of its wings, the muzzle, the ears, and what it kind of is like, it's like athlete's foot is kind of how I describe it. It gets them itchy, they wake up out of hibernation, and they starve to death because they're using energy, they're fighting this fungus with their immune system, and they basically don't make it through the winter. So it's not the fungus itself that's necessarily killing them, it's that they're starving to death. We see a lot of bats getting super thirsty, and they go out for a drink and can't get one, or the food that they need to sustain. We definitely see this in smaller species. Ooh, goodness. Okay, sorry. We definitely see this in the smaller species because they have less reserves than the bigger bat species that we have. There you go. As you can see, it's actually spread over the US and continues to spread. And if you look at Montana now, Montana got hit this last hibernation period between 20 and 21. So it is still spreading. We all understand pandemics at this point. This is a serious one for bats. So it is hitting our hibernating bats. And the northern long-eared bat was listed as threatened because of this on April 2nd, 2015. There are going to be a few more of these species on this list because of this fungal disease soon. And then the last threat is land use change. So this is where we're putting things in their habitats, not changing their habitats, but putting new things that could affect them. This is like wind turbines at this point. wind turbines are now in their airspace. They are spinning in their airspace. It is hitting migratory bat species. So bats that instead of hibernating decide to go south for the winter, and they hit all these turbines as they're migrating through. It is killing millions. So you're getting the fungus that's hitting our hibernating bats. You're getting the wind turbines that are hitting literally our migrating bats. All bats are being hit on all sides. So are bats in trouble from all of this? Probably. And the reason we don't know is because we don't really monitor bats that much. Lovely. And it's a big problem. We don't, like birds, we don't have monitoring programs that people go out and do in the Christmas bird count, and we don't have the breeding bird surveys that any amateur can go and do. We just don't have that. So we have no idea, particularly with the migratory species, what our population sizes actually are. Are they being affected? Are we talking we have millions of bats and a couple of million doesn't matter? Or do we have 3 million and a couple of million is a big deal? So we just don't know. So this is my research kind of deals with this problem. One, I kind of raise awareness for local bats with things like this and get the public involved. Two, I monitor bat populations. Three, I explore all the threats to bats and find ways to alleviate those threats. So raising awareness, I actually go around schools and give chats. I give Bats 101, which is kind of like this, to high schoolers. I've done a number of schools. I do them annually. And I try and get as many kids involved in monitoring bats as I can. Where you've probably got your older birders able to go out and see birds during the day. You've actually got high schoolers who are physically fit enough, and it doesn't matter if they fall down in the dark, that they can go out in the evening. So you've got that. I'm going to change my camera. Let's see if I can do this. Should get a little bit foggier. I've got two cameras for this exact reason. All right. And then I go do BioBlitz. I get my grad students involved, helping the community, going out, catching bats and showing them. So this is what one of these pictures are, is one of my grad students showing these kids some bats that they just caught. And then the other thing that I do is I have a Bat Box Fest. I've joined up with the Boy Scouts of America. They need their woodworking certificate. And most of them decide to build bat boxes. And every year I try and have, or 2 years, I have a Bat Box Fest where I will give out bat boxes for free if you tell me where, well, if you tell me what you have, and I can tell you where to put it. So we do that. I do a lot of monitoring bats. I started this in 2013. We go around local parks with the high schoolers that I've managed to convince, and we do a 2-kilometer walk listening for bats. So everybody has bat detectors, and we go listening for bats. We've been doing this for a long time, and we're starting to realize if which bats are in trouble, if their populations are going down based on activity. And so far, I have to say, I don't think we're seeing any declines in the Fort Worth area. And then exploring different threats to bats. A lot of my research is used to be involved in wind turbines. We're looking for what causes bats to come into contact with wind turbines. Another aspect is roads and road networks. There's actually an issue with vehicles stopping bats from crossing roads. So if you have a road network with lots of traffic on it, you're basically minimizing the areas that bats can fly because they won't cross roads. And then habitat loss, obviously I said that was a big deal, and urbanization. I'm trying to see if we can improve urban habitats for bats. What are the bats doing in urban habitats? We're actually seeing from the transect walks that all 7 species are in the DFW area. And that's a great thing. And that's opened up the door to, can we make it better for them? So we're doing a lot of things that look at what bats need. And understanding the importance of the resources that bats need is the way forward for most of this. And just like everything in this planet, bats need water, they need food, they need shelter, they need mating opportunities, and they need a way to get to all of these resources, and that's connectivity. So you're talking commuting routes and migratory routes and things like that. So there has to be ways to get these resources better for bats to improve urban habitats, or even understand why bats are coming into, say, contact with turbines. So I've had a lot of students who've looked into this, why bats would be touching turbine tower surfaces, why they're coming in at all. It could be because it's a water source, like smooth surface looks just like water acoustically. It could be because that surface is acting like an acoustic mirror. And if an insect, which likes white, and these surfaces are white, sitting on that white surface, is now popping, because when they echolocate, all they can see with their echo is that bug. It makes them easy to pick off. So there's all these sorts of reasons: food, water. There's even mating reasons. So the biggest tree on the landscape can be attractive to females, so that male wants to hang out at the biggest tree on the landscape. However, it's a little bit dangerous for them. So we've been finding bats under wind turbines that happen to be mating ready. Don't ask me about that. I'm not explaining it. Okay. And then finding ways to alleviate those threats. So wind turbines, you've got turbine placement. So if you're planning on putting a wind farm up, we can actually kind of suggest don't put it near a bat roost or an area known to have an endangered species of bats. You can use deterrents to stop those males coming in and using the turbine towers as the biggest tree on the landscape. You could curtail. So you might not be able to stop bats just hitting the wind turbines, but if you turn those wind turbines off during the time when those bats are migrating through at night, you can actually alleviate a lot of death. And then there's things like texturizing the turbine surface so that those bugs don't pop, so it doesn't look like water. There's those kind of options. For roads and road networks, it's the same sort of thing. You have to ask about placement. You could put soundproof barriers that would stop bats from being scared of being near roads, not being able to echolocate because of the high frequencies coming off the roads due to traffic. There's green bridges, there's canopy links that can be put in place so those bats can get across the roads. Even culverts that go under the bridge, under the road, actually work really well for bats. And then there's this habitat loss and urbanization. Now, urban planning is what we're kind of looking at now. Restoration, improving areas, improving water, improving the resources available for bats in an urban environment seems to be the way forward, and making sure that there is enough resources available for them. And this actually led on to, and I'll talk about this research in particular, the use of residential swimming pools as a water resource. Now, these are permanent. Of course, most people have their pools uncovered the majority of the summer. And in hotter areas such as Texas, in urban environments, pools are common. So we started looking at whether bats were coming in and drinking at residential swimming pools, and we found, yes, they did. But we only found that they used swimming pools when they didn't have any other options. And that's when the water sources in parks and like ponds, drainage ditches, retention ponds all dried up. And then they would start using the swimming pools. So I was like, how can we make this better? What makes a bat-friendly swimming pool? So that was one of the topics that one of my students looked at, where it's also led on to, do bats use pools in a more natural habitat, like a game reserve in South Africa? So you wouldn't think that they would be using swimming pools in a game reserve. You'd think they would use the watering holes or the river or something like that. But they are, we've discovered they are using the swimming pools. And then up and coming project is, how important is water quality? If the water quality in the drainage ditch and the retention pond is bad, does that mean that these guys are going to be using the swimming pools more often? Is it mean that they're reliant on swimming pools at this time of the year? So we're looking into that. And just to finish off this little bit, I will give you a hint of what makes a bat-friendly swimming pool, because we have completed this research. And it's very, very simple. First of all, you just turn off lights. If you have lights on in your backyard over the pool, just turn them off when you're not using the pool. You're going to get bats. And keep your pets inside. We've seen pets outside drinking from the pool at the same time bats are drinking from the pool, but generally having your dog or cat out for that hour after dusk would stop some bats coming. So just keep them in for that hour. Then what you can do is you could, a bit more detail, remove clutter from the pool or next to the pool. Any hedgerows or any plantings or anything that's next to the pool can actually stop those bats coming in and being able to drink from the pool. It kind of gets in the way. And then if you're really daring, you could change the treatment of your pool. So chlorine is what everybody has, a lot of people, but salt and mineral are actually better. And that's because there are more bugs above the pool that the bats can eat. So you start attracting more. It's not about quality. They'll still drink the chlorine pool. And then if you're going to build in a pool, make sure you got a straight edge pool. Now that goes against what we thought, because pools that are kind of round look more natural, we would thought, but straight edge pools have more surface area that allow the bat to come in. And so they're used more. And again, same reason, larger pools are better. Adding in a cliff feature. Now this is interesting because bats are actually using linear features all the time to protect them from birds of prey, from owls, things that are predators that are going to get them whilst they're flying. So they hug tree lines, they hug fence lines, they hug walls. So putting in this cliff feature gives them a protection, makes them feel more at ease about using your pool. Just on one side though. And then getting them there, like I said, they need some protection, hugging those tree lines, making sure your trees are there. Don't remove trees, maybe consider planting some more so that you can connect the landscape between all of these pools and where they're living, where they're roosting, so that they can get to your pool. Those would be the simplest ways to increase the bats in your area, drinking at your pool. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for listening, and I'm going to take all of your questions and tackle them, I hope.
All right. Tory, thank you for such a great presentation and for getting our conversation about bats started. Our plan is to spend the next 25 minutes or so basically having you ask all of the things that we've been wondering about bats. So I do encourage our audience members to continue to put questions in the Q&A. We've got some great questions already, so keep them coming. And of course, we'll try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. And I think Eric already has some questions ready for you.
I had a couple of questions. Thank you again, Tory, for the great talk. So maybe I missed it or didn't quite understand, but do bats actually land to drink, or is it one of those flyby drinking out of the pool?
Yeah, it's flyby drinking. Let's see if I can go back and show you this. Should not have done it. Oop, there you go. There you go. So this one, the background, you can see this is a bat coming in and drinking.
Oh.
There you go.
Oh, fascinating. Oh,
yep.
Okay.
They drink on the wing just like swallows. Like I said, for every bat, you have an equivalent bird. Swallows do it on the wing, bats do it on the wing.
Interesting. Yeah, we also have another question as well. Do bats talk to each other in echolocation, or is it just mainly for hunting?
Actually, if you go to the Congress Avenue Bridge and you are not of a certain age, you can't hear the lower, higher frequencies of these bats. You can, the first time I went down, I was, are they always this loud? And the person who was there, who was from Bat Conservation International and kind of elderly, was like, young lady, you cannot hear bats echolocating. So these are the bats chatting. They do chat to each other. We have a lot of communication calls. We have bats yelling at each other, telling each other to get out of the way. They're foraging in this area. So there are communication calls. They're very, very chatty bats, for sure. And if you are near, if you decide you're going to have a bat box, you can actually hear them chattering to each other before they wake up and go away. Well, before they fly away for the evening. So it can be quite entertaining.
Fascinating. Thank you.
All right. So Tory, I think one of the things that really comes through when you talk about bats is how much you love them. So I'm wondering if you can just tell us how you became interested in bats. So what started your love affair with bats?
Well, it's been long-standing. So I was always interested in wildlife from a very early age. At the age of 9, I knew I was going to do a PhD in wildlife. Didn't matter what it was. And so I've always made sure that whatever I did, every project at school would be animal related. And I had a project that was looking at bats coming out of a house near my house, and they would fly around the garden. So I would sit out with a deck chair every day and watch these bats come out, and I got kind of obsessed with it. And then I went off to university, and in British universities, we have a tutor who looks after you the whole time that you're in your degree program. And you meet up with them like once a month. And mine just happened to be Professor John Altrincham, the leading expert in bats. So he was contagious. I'm trying to be contagious. And there was no looking back, basically. It was bats all the way from then on.
All right. I think your contagiousness is working. So we've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience. First, can you tell us whether or not bats drink blood? That seems to be a very, I don't know if it's a myth, I don't know if it's fact, but if you can clear that up for us. And then if they do indeed drink blood, is there a numbing agent in their blood? And what is it and where does it come from, if there is?
Oh, goodness. Okay, multiple questions. All right, so there are 4 species out of the 1,400 plus species of bat that exist that drink blood. None of them are found in the US. You will find Desmodus rotundus in Mexico. And I held that guy, and he's kind of sweet. So they're not that bad. They scuttle along the ground, and they go up to a limb that is out, or like your arm or your elbow or your ankle, and their teeth are so sharp that they just brush by you. So you know when you've accidentally dropped your razor blade in the bath and you cut yourself and you didn't even realize the bath fills up with blood? Same thing. You do not know that you have been bitten. So it's not a numbing agent. It's that their teeth are so sharp that you don't even notice. And they don't like bite down. It's just they accidentally slice past you. When I say accidentally, they move their mouth in a direction, and then they lick up the blood. And the one thing that they have in their spit is an anticoagulant, if I said that right, that continues to let you bleed so they can continue to drink. And that's the only thing. It's not like vampires sucking your blood or anything like that. It's actually quite interesting how they do it. And vampire bats are the most amazing because they actually show altruism. So they all hang up in a cave, just hanging up on the ceiling. And if some of their neighbors haven't gone out to drink blood, they share the blood with them. So they'll regurgitate some for them. So nobody in the colony starves. It's all about making sure that everybody gets food. There is no disparity. So they actually, it's really, and they're not related. They've actually shown that these individuals that they're giving blood to are just neighbors, completely unrelated, not family members. So it's actually kind of cute. But yes. And as I said, there are always birds that do an equivalent. We're not getting upset that birds drink blood now, do we? That parody Kiwi thing, I don't know what it is. There's a bird in New Zealand that decides it likes sheep blood. So does the same thing, sits on and pecks them. But so that's more violent than bats. You don't even notice with bats.
So you've brought up birds a few times, and this is going to be the part of the evening where you help settle a marital dispute.
Oh, goodness.
So my husband and I will frequently go on walks in the evening, and there are flying objects in the sky on occasion, and I swear they're bats, and he thinks that they're swallows. So okay. How do we figure out who's right and who's wrong?
All right, just before dusk, chimney swifts come out, and they have the same body type as bats. So I do get a lot of people sending me videos going, are these bats? I think these are bats. You can hear them. And I'm like, well, that's your failing there. So if you hear a little chitter, chitter, chitter noise, that is a chimney swift.
So you're saying that my husband's right and I'm wrong?
If you hear noises, yes.
Okay. Yeah, he's
but
right.
It has to be past that. So it has to be kind of getting dark. So whereas chimney swifts are just before dusk, bats are just after dusk.
All right. Well, while I hide over here in shame that I was wrong, I'll let Eric ask the next few questions.
Yeah, no problem at all. So one of the questions in the chat is, hi from London. What would be a good entry-level bat detector to buy?
Ooh, okay. So there is quite a few that came out at Britain is probably one of the best places for a bat detector. They have bat boxes that are came out years ago. They were on it before we could even think about it here. But I will say that if you want to visually see these calls, the same way I showed you how the chirps look on a spectrogram, you can actually get a bat detector that you attach to a phone. It can be an iPhone, it can be an Android, it can be an iPad, any of these things. It's called the Echometer Touch. The software is free to download to the app. The only thing you have to pay for is the ultrasonic microphone that you plug in the base, like the power bit. And then you can go out and listen to the bats and see what they look like. And it tries to tell you what the bats are. And it has the British bats on there. It has South African bats on there. It has neotropical bats on there, and it has US bats. So you can pretty much go with your bat detector anywhere in the world, give or take, and be able to use this bat detector, which is amazing. So I cannot say enough. I do actually do some product testing for them. So I do sound like a salesperson at this point, but I was completely sold on it. It is really good for an amateur. It's really good for a professional. Now they have the amateur version that is cheaper than the professional version. So the professional version is like $400. The amateur version, I think, is like $250. But if they sell enough of them, their plan is to make the amateur version $99, which is actually very cheap and cheaper than the bat box in the UK now that doesn't actually have the whole spectrogram thing. And the little ultrasonic detector can attach to your key ring. It has a little pouch that you put it on. It fits in your handbag really easily. You can just whip it out on any occasion, whereas all the others are a little bit bigger. So I honestly can't say enough about Wildlife Acoustics Echometer Touch. And there's different kinds. You just got to go on the website and see which one suits you.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Now we are getting some questions regarding interest in working with bats and other bat activities. One of which is from someone in the audience. We want to put up some bat boxes, but we have chickens. Would the chickens deter the bats from using those bat boxes?
Nope, because the chickens would have to fly quite high to use the bat boxes. So your bat box, okay. So this opens a huge door about bat boxes, is that bats are picky. You've got these different species that all behave differently. So they're going to want different kinds of bat boxes. So the big flat ones, they go on buildings. They don't go on trees. I actually have to drive by a bat box that's hanging off a dead conifer that's skinny mini, and the box is like this size in comparison. It will never, ever get a single bat in it. It's not the right box for a conifer tree. The only bat that's going to use a conifer tree is the hoary bat. And it will never be used in a bat box, and that's completely wrong design anyway. So those bat boxes go on a building. Now here in Texas, we don't have a lot of two-story buildings, and all of these bat boxes need to be kind of like south, southeast, southwest facing, so that they keep cool when they need to and keep warm when they need to. So you can't put it in north facing. And have them, if you're going to put them on a building, have them as high as you can in the eaves of a two-story house, and make sure it's over like a rose bed or a flower bed. Do not have it just going onto your patio or something like that, because you'll have this huge pile of poop if it works. I mean, yay, it works, but you can actually fertilize your flower bed at the same time with, but make sure it doesn't grow too high, because you need that drop. So things like the Mexican freetail really need that drop. So they're like albatross. They have to drop out, and then just as they're about to hit the ground, they can fly out. So you guys might have heard we had a lot of flooding. I think it was like not last year, but maybe the year before. And there's a bridge in Houston where they were just pulling bats from underneath the bridge to save them. That's because when the water got to a certain point, the bats couldn't fly away. So they just had to sit and wait until they drowned, because you either jump in the water now or you wait till it hits you. So that's why everybody could actually just reach under and save those bats, or try and save as many as they could, because those bats didn't have enough room to drop and fly. So that's the problem you have to deal with when putting up bat boxes, that they have to be high enough. I would say, let's work 8 would be a minimum foot would be a minimum. Try and get it as high as you can. Make sure you've got it on a trunk of the tree, south, southeast, west facing, that has no clutter underneath it, no branches, anything like that, so those bats can just drop out. That's what makes it good. Make sure it's stable. And when it comes to the bat boxes that you put on trees, they need to have 3, and they're like those bird box size bat boxes. They all go on, and so the bats can move from one to the other when the heat changes. So when you're thinking about bat boxes, it is more complicated than you think. And both the ones on the building and the ones on the tree, your evening bat, the mosquito eaters, are likely to use. So it does help them and help you. It's a wise choice. I'm just
Very good. Thank you. Marlo, I think there's more questions to come.
Yeah, so we have someone in the audience wondering what the average lifespan of a bat is and whether we can estimate their age and if it would be useful to estimate their age.
It's always useful to estimate things' ages. However, it is more tricky with bats because they go into this kind of torpor state, this hibernation. They can, all the bats around us, if it gets too hot, they go to sleep. If it gets too cold, they go to sleep for a bit. So here they just switching, taking their systems down. I kind of feel like it's sci-fi where they're going into stasis. And because they're going into stasis, they're not aging. So crazily enough, bats are the oldest living small mammal. They have, I think, for example, the eastern red has been known to live up to 30 years. And all of these bats, except for the eastern red, only have 1 young a year. So if they get hit by turbines, if they die from white nose syndrome, they're not like rodents. They're not having multiple young a year. They're having 1 young a year. So it's a big deal when they get killed. Did I answer that question? Because I went off on a tangent as normal.
No, you did. You did. You just mentioned white nose syndrome, and I had a follow-up question about white nose syndrome. Do we know how to prevent it? Are there treatments for it? What's the status of white nose syndrome?
It's, again, tricky situation. Oh, I didn't answer the aging bats. No, you cannot age bats because of the whole status thing. Anyway, white nose is tricky. So what they found a fungicide that would work, but how do you administer it? So it's all locked up in paperwork because you cannot be spraying a cave full of fungicide because you kill so many other things that are important to that cave ecosystem. So it's actually on hold. I know that people have been taking bats and putting them in artificial caves and making sure that they're inoculated, make sure that they get through the winter before they release them. But we don't know where these bats are all hibernating. If you know a big roost site and you can go in and pick them out, then that's great. But we have no idea where a majority of bats are hibernating. It's just every now and again we find and identify a big bat roost. So there's only so much that we can do, and it costs a lot of money to do it. So it's sort of, let's try and restore and help bats in other ways, and maybe we can offset the number that are dying from white nose. It is tricky. It is a really tricky situation.
As long as we're on the topic of pandemics, what can you tell us about COVID and bats? I think there's been a lot of debate, at least in the news, about whether or not COVID came from a lab, whether or not it came from animals, and bats being one of those animals that may transmit COVID. What do we know?
Okay. All right. So let's see where I start with this. So complicated. So the research shows, there are publications that COVID is, the majority of it comes from bats. Absolutely. That is the science. There it is. You cannot deny it. It comes from bats. Now, the thing that people are kind of forgetting when they're like, it comes from a lab, is that there's a part of it that comes from pangolin, and this has been shown. Now, I don't know why a lab would splice a bit of African pangolin into a Chinese horseshoe bat COVID but I don't question those sort of things. But the likelihood is that they wouldn't. You would be expecting, if this leaked from a lab, it would be pure bat COVID that's been manipulated artificially to be a biohazard to humans, which it was never intended to do that. The likelihood is, and this has happened multiple times, that bats are a reservoir for diseases. We know that those bats, those particular bats, the Chinese horseshoe bat, has COVID. The same as we know that a fruit bat in West Africa had Ebola. And I was actually at a conference in Puerto Rico where researchers gave a talk on Ebola in those particular bats and said it is a ticking time bomb. It is a matter of time before someone who's eating those bats, because the locals were eating the bats because it was bushmeat, were going to not cook their bat properly and get Ebola. And sure enough, 2 years later, that actually happened. It isn't the bat bit them. It is that somebody was eating the bat. Some person bit a bat and it wasn't cooked properly. And that is how Ebola got out. So we had that kind of scare that pandemic was going to happen. And lots of people called me up and went, should I kill all the bats in my neighborhood because they have Ebola? And I was like, they don't have Ebola. The bats that we have here have rabies. And we know they have rabies. And we're doing things to prevent you getting rabies, like vaccinating your dog and cats every year. We've got this under control. That's what our bats have, and we can deal with it. We know what we're doing. And then in China, they have these bats that they are eating. Again, it is people that are eating. They take them from the wild, they try and breed them a couple of populations, and they sell them in these wet markets. Now, what's happening in these wet markets is you're also getting species from all over the world that wouldn't be exposed to these kind of viruses and bacteria that all of these other animals from that specific area are harboring and immune to. So the issue is that if you're introducing all of these other species that don't have the immunity, if say, you have a horseshoe bat that happens to pee on a pangolin from Africa that shouldn't have been there in the first place, that pangolin now gets infected. You have a mutation that then that pangolin has, and then somebody doesn't cook their pangolin properly, and it becomes another mutation that then can be passed on from human to human. So it had to go through two mutations to get to this point that we now have it. And you all know that it's mutating again, and we're getting all these variants. So it's not unheard of for this one to turn. So the logical explanation where the science is pointing is that people are eating things that they shouldn't be eating. And that is what's causing all of these pandemics. Not the bat's fault. You wouldn't eat a bat here. No. Well, it's just a matter of time until someone gets rabies.
So on the topic of rabies, so I think when we think about bats, we do think about rabies. How common is infection of a human with rabies from a bat? And then what else can we do to prevent humans from getting rabies aside from vaccinating our pets? Are there other things we can do?
Not pick up bats during the daytime that's on the floor. So that's it. When a bat has rabies, it's kind of in their system and they don't get in your way. They don't do anything. They just fly around and do their own business at night. Most people don't even notice they're there. Almost every single case of rabies that has been reported is that there is a bat somewhere in someone's garden, on the floor, on a pavement, or in the pool, and somebody goes and picks it up and gets bitten and then does nothing. And that is why people die of rabies, because they don't get it seen to. We have post-rabies vaccination that works. You go get it, you're fine. So if you even think that you may have been bitten by a bat, just go get the rabies vaccination. It's fine. It doesn't do anything after to you. I'm completely sane and I've had it so many times, it's ridiculous.
So if you do have a bat in your swimming pool or in your house, what's the best thing to do?
Leave it alone. There are people that will come around. If it is dying of rabies, then I would just make sure your pets don't go near it and let it just get over it, and then get some big gardening gloves, put it in a bag and throw it in your bin. In the pool, same thing. You can still get rabies from the dead bodies, so please be careful. Just don't touch these animals. There are people that have bat boxes where the bats fall out. You may get a bat hitting a window or a wall or something like that, and they're dazed, or you get a bat in your house and you hit it and it hits a window and it gets dazed. You can actually get some really thick gardening gloves, get that bat, and then just hook it on a tree. Just hook it on a tree and leave it, walk away, and it probably won't be there the next day or when the sun comes up. On the same thing, if you do get a bat in your house, remember it can see and it echolocates at the same time. So if you have your lights on in the house, that bat is looking around the house. It's just spinning around. You can open all the doors and the windows, but they look like black spaces. You turn off that light, the bat will fly out the window and door. It will happen immediately. It is because you have the light on that bat is flying around.
That's great advice.
Thank you. My best advice.
So unfortunately, we only have 1 minute left. So we probably have time for only one question. And we have a question from the audience wondering how they can get involved with bats. So if somebody wants to help your research team do bat walks with you, what do they do?
You can contact me. I think my email address is provided, right? So if you want to come on bat walks, I only do Foster Park at the moment. We're not actually, well, we weren't allowed to encourage people in the last year to come and do bat walks because of social distancing. So there was a select few that would walk very, very far apart to do these surveys, but we're getting back into it. We can use all the help. So anyone can come. It's always on a Monday. It's 20 minutes after sunset. We start walking. We're in the car park. If you want to come, I can send you text messages and emails that say, hey, we're doing this at this time. If you're available, come along.
All right, we will put your email in the chat, and maybe we'll send it out to all of our audience members via email as well so that they can get in touch with you. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap things up. Before we do that, I do want to thank all of our audience members today. We appreciate all of you taking your time and spending your Wednesday evening with us. We also hope that you learned something new and that whatever you've learned, you will share with your friends and your family. We also hope that you will join us again for our next Fort Worth Science Cafe. So stay on the lookout on our Facebook page, Twitter, Meetup, and Instagram to see what we're up to next. And of course, we have got to thank Dr. Bennett. It is clear that you love bats, and I'm personally feeling a little bit more inspired to look up in the sky tonight to see what's flying around me. And I'm definitely now thinking about putting a bat box up. So hopefully this conversation will lead to a few more bat boxes in the area and more interest in bats and more protection for bats. So we really, really appreciate you being here. So thanks again for joining us and for sharing with us your love for bats and all of this great information. So with that, we will wrap it up. Thanks, Tory, and thanks to all of our participants tonight.